The call came in at 4:47 a.m. as a standard warrant service. Federal agents had surveillance footage linking a commercial warehouse on the city's industrial outskirts to a trafficking investigation that had been building for 8 months. The property was registered under a legitimate import-export business. The owner had no criminal record. On paper, it was a routine evidence seizure at a location tied to financial crimes. The SWAT element was requested because the building's layout showed multiple loading bays, offices, and storage areas that created tactical complexity. The plan was straightforward: secure the perimeter, make entry through the main office entrance, detain any personnel present, and allow investigators to execute the search warrant. Intelligence suggested 2 to 3 employees would be on site during the early morning shift. The warehouse sat on 4 acres of fenced property. Surveillance units confirmed dim interior lighting and a single vehicle parked near the administrative entrance. Thermal imaging picked up heat signatures consistent with occupancy in the front office area. The tactical team staged 2 blocks away at 5:15 a.m. 12 operators divided into 2 entry teams and a perimeter security element. The briefing was clinical. Primary objective: secure all personnel without incident. Secondary objective: facilitate the federal search warrant. No intelligence suggested weapons, resistance, or heightened risk beyond the standard unknowns of any forced entry. Operators checked equipment, confirmed radio channels, and moved into position as dawn light began filtering through the industrial district's fog. At 5:41 a.m., the first team approached the main entrance. The second team positioned at the rear loading dock. Perimeter units locked down vehicle access points. The entry was textbook. Hydraulic ram on the office door, announcement protocols, controlled flooding of the front administrative space. 2 men were inside the office area. Both were detained within 40 seconds without resistance. They identified themselves as warehouse managers. Neither showed signs of panic or attempted to flee. Standard procedure. Operators moved them to the secured perimeter while the second wave began clearing the warehouse floor. The main storage area was vast. 30-foot ceilings supported by steel framework. Rows of industrial shelving stacked with commercial goods, shipping pallets wrapped in plastic, and standard warehouse equipment. Forklifts sat idle near the loading bays. The space smelled of cardboard, diesel, and stale air. Operators moved methodically through the aisles, clearing sight lines and confirming the area matched the building schematics provided by the county assessor. Then the K-9 unit signaled. The detection dog, a German shepherd trained for both explosives and human tracking, broke from standard search protocol. Instead of moving through the warehouse systematically, the animal pulled toward the western wall where a row of storage cages sat behind chain-link fencing. These were standard secured storage units, the kind warehouses use for high-value inventory or climate-controlled goods. The dog's behavior shifted from trained search to focused alert. Nose to the ground. Constant pull toward the rear of the caged area. The handler tried to redirect. The dog refused. It sat at the base of the fencing and stared at a section of floor near the back corner of the cage array. Operators approached. Nothing appeared unusual. The cages were locked. Inside were standard commercial goods, electronics still in manufacturer packaging, and shrink-wrapped pallets. The floor was smooth concrete, darker near the wall where years of forklift traffic had worn stains into the surface. The K-9 handler called for the team leader. Something wasn't adding up. The dog was trained for scent detection, not drug or explosive residue. The behavior indicated human presence. But the thermal sweep from outside hadn't shown activity in this part of the building. An operator noticed the floor pattern. The concrete near the western wall had a different texture. Newer pour, different aggregate mix. It ran in a 12-foot section that didn't match the rest of the warehouse floor. Someone had repaired or replaced this section within the last few years. The team leader made the call. Bring in ground-penetrating radar. While they waited for the equipment, operators secured the area and began pulling inventory from the storage cages. The locked gates were cut. pallets were moved. Boxes were relocated. Beneath one stack of electronics, an operator found a steel panel flush with the floor, roughly 4 feet by 3 feet, with recessed hinges on one side and a keyed lock on the other. The discovery changed everything. This wasn't part of the building plans. The assessor's records showed a standard concrete slab foundation with no basement, no crawl space, and no underground utilities beyond the main service lines running to the street. The ground-penetrating radar arrived at 6:23 a.m. The operator ran the scanner across the western wall section. The readout was immediate and unambiguous. Void space beneath the floor. Not a small utility chase or drainage system. A structured cavity approximately 18 feet deep, extending 40 feet along the wall and 20 feet back from the surface. A subterranean room. Off the books. Hidden beneath a legitimate commercial facility. The team leader contacted command. Federal agents were notified. Additional units were called to the scene. The warehouse was now a major crime scene, and whatever was below that steel panel represented an unknown threat level that required escalated response protocols. Operators established a security perimeter around the hatch. Ventilation specialists were brought in to test the air quality below. Toxic gas, methane buildup, or oxygen depletion could turn an underground space into a death trap for entry teams. The air sample came back negative for hazardous gases but showed elevated CO2 levels consistent with poor ventilation in an enclosed space. Someone had been down there recently. The air exchange hadn't equalized yet. At 6:58 a.m., the decision was made to open the hatch. 2 operators positioned at the panel with pry bars and hydraulic jacks. The lock was a commercial-grade deadbolt, reinforced and flush-mounted. Picking it would take time. Forcing it was faster. The steel panel lifted with a hydraulic hiss. Beneath it, a vertical shaft descended into darkness. Metal rungs were bolted into the concrete wall, forming a ladder. The shaft was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to descend without full tactical gear. The smell that rose from below was immediate and overwhelming. Human waste, sweat, stagnant air, and something chemical that operators couldn't immediately identify. A fiber optic camera was lowered into the shaft. The feed showed the ladder descending approximately 15 feet before opening into a larger space. The camera resolution was limited, but movement was visible at the bottom. Shapes, figures, people. The estimate was updated in real time, not 2 or 3 individuals. Command made the call. Full tactical descent. Medic teams on standby. Ambulances moved to the warehouse perimeter. Federal trafficking units were now leading the operation. SWAT's role shifted from the first operator descended at 7:14 a.m. Helmet light cutting through the darkness. Radio contact maintained with surface teams. The shaft opened into a corridor. Concrete walls. Exposed electrical conduit running along the ceiling. Industrial lighting, currently off. The air was thick, almost suffocating. The corridor extended in both directions. To the left, it terminated at a locked steel door. To the right, it stretched approximately 30 feet before branching into multiple doorways. The operator signaled clear, and the second team member descended. They moved toward the steel door first. It was reinforced, industrial grade, with a sliding bolt lock accessible only from the corridor side. The kind of door designed to keep people in, not out. The bolt was thrown. The door opened inward. The room beyond was 12 feet by 10 feet. No windows. A single overhead bulb, currently off. 6 people were inside. 4 women, 2 men. Ages ranging from late teens to mid-30s. They were sitting on thin mattresses laid directly on the concrete floor. Their clothing was filthy. Their faces showed signs of malnutrition and dehydration. When the operators entered with flashlights, none of them moved. No screaming. No rushing toward the door. Just blank stares and shallow breathing. The kind of resigned stillness that comes from weeks or months of confinement without hope of rescue. One of the operators spoke. Identified himself as law enforcement. told them they were safe. The response was minimal. One woman nodded. Another started crying silently. The second room was 20 feet down the corridor. Same steel door, same lock mechanism. This one held 7 people. 3 men, 4 women, similar condition, same vacant expressions. One man had visible bruising on his arms and face. Another had an untreated leg wound that had scabbed over but showed signs of infection. The third room held 5. The fourth held 8. The fifth held 9. By the time the full extraction team was underground, the count had reached 43 individuals. All adults. Multiple nationalities based on initial language identification. Spanish, Mandarin, Tagalog, and what one operator thought might be Amharic. None of them had identification. None of them had phones or personal belongings. They had been locked in those rooms, beneath a functioning warehouse, in the middle of an industrial district where trucks moved goods every day and employees clocked in and out without knowing what was 15 feet below their workstations. The medical teams descended. Triage was set up in the main corridor. Dehydration was universal. Malnutrition was severe in approximately 30% of the group. Several individuals showed signs of physical trauma. 2 needed immediate hospital transport. The rest were ambulatory but weak. Operators continued clearing the underground structure. The corridor system was more extensive than initial scans had suggested. It branched into a second wing that contained what appeared to be a storage area. Plastic-wrapped bundles were stacked against the walls. Documents in multiple languages. Ledgers. Photographs. The kind of evidence that federal investigators would spend months cataloging. At the far end of the second wing, operators found another locked room, smaller than the others, 6 feet by 8 feet. The door had additional reinforcement. The lock was a keypad system, not a mechanical bolt. The entry team forced it open. Inside was a single occupant, a woman in her early 20s. She was handcuffed to a steel ring bolted into the wall. The chain was short enough that she couldn't stand fully upright or lie flat. She had been in that position long enough that her wrists were raw and her legs showed signs of circulation damage. She didn't react when the door opened. Didn't speak when operators entered. Just stared at the wall. The medic who examined her found evidence of severe dehydration, possible kidney damage, and psychological trauma that would require intensive care. The entry team worked methodically to free her from the restraints. Bolt cutters on the chain. Medical assessment before any movement. When they finally lifted her onto a stretcher, she didn't acknowledge their presence. Eyes open. Breathing steady. But somewhere else entirely. The timeline was reconstructed over the following hours. Federal agents interviewed the 2 warehouse managers who had been detained during the initial entry. Both claimed ignorance. Both insisted they had no knowledge of the underground structure. Both maintained they were legitimate employees of a legitimate import business. Digital forensics on the warehouse computers told a different story. Encrypted files, communication logs, financial transfers routed through offshore accounts. The warehouse wasn't just a front. It was an operational hub for a trafficking network that extended across 6 states and involved coordination with international contacts. The 43 individuals found underground had been there for varying lengths of time. Some had arrived within the past 2 weeks. Others had been confined for more than 4 months. They had been brought to the warehouse under false promises of employment, legal documentation, or safe passage. Once inside, they were moved through the steel hatch and locked in the underground rooms. The investigation revealed that the facility had been used as a holding area before individuals were distributed to secondary locations, labor operations, agricultural sites, urban service industries. The people in those rooms were inventory. They were being processed, assessed, and prepared for transfer to the next point in the supply chain. The transfer was scheduled for that afternoon. Trucks were set to arrive at the warehouse at 2:30 p.m. The individuals underground would have been moved within 8 hours of the SWAT entry. Some would have been transported to work sites where they would have disappeared into systems designed to exploit undocumented labor. Others would have been moved to secondary trafficking operations where rescue would have become exponentially more difficult. If the K-9 unit hadn't signaled, if the dog had continued through the standard warehouse search pattern, if the operators hadn't noticed the floor inconsistency, the warrant service would have concluded by 8 a.m. The federal agents would have seized financial records and computers. The warehouse would have been cleared and released back to the property owner pending further investigation, and 43 people would have remained locked in those rooms for another 6 hours until the transfer trucks arrived. The survivors were transported to medical facilities under federal protective custody. Victim advocacy organizations were contacted. Translators were brought in. The process of identification, documentation, and legal status determination began immediately. None of them would be returning to the underground rooms. None of them would be loaded onto trucks. The warehouse was gutted. Federal evidence teams spent 4 days documenting the underground structure. Every room was photographed. Every lock mechanism was analyzed. The ventilation system, primitive and insufficient, was inspected for engineering details that might identify who designed and built the facility. The investigation expanded rapidly. The 2 detained managers provided limited cooperation, but the digital evidence was comprehensive. The network extended beyond the warehouse. Other locations were identified. Other operations were disrupted. The trafficking organization that had operated for years with minimal detection suddenly faced coordinated law enforcement action across multiple jurisdictions. The warehouse owner was arrested 6 days after the initial raid. The arrest happened at an airport, boarding a flight to a country without extradition agreements. Federal charges included human trafficking, conspiracy, racketeering, and multiple counts of unlawful confinement. The evidence package was substantial. The outcome was not in doubt. For the SWAT operators who made entry that morning, the operation became a reference point. Not because of the tactical execution, not because of the forced entry or the warrant service, but because of the 43 people who were 15 feet underground in a structure that wasn't supposed to exist. The call had come in as routine. The intelligence suggested a standard search warrant. The entry was planned for a commercial property with minimal resistance potential. None of the briefing materials mentioned underground confinement. None of the surveillance indicated the presence of victims. The discovery was accidental. The intervention was timely. The rescue was successful. And if any part of the operation had been delayed by an hour, if the K-9 unit had been called off, if the operators had accepted the warehouse as it appeared and moved on to the next objective, the people in those rooms would have been gone by mid-afternoon. The evidence would have remained buried. The victims would have been scattered across a network designed to make them invisible. And the warehouse would have continued operating as a legitimate business while the underground structure beneath it remained hidden in plain sight. The final count: 43 individuals rescued. 8 hours before scheduled transfer. 4 months maximum confinement time for the longest-held victim. 0 casualties during extraction. The operation was classified as a critical success by federal oversight. The trafficking network was dismantled within 6 months. The warehouse was demolished. The underground structure was filled with concrete. The property was seized under federal asset forfeiture laws. Where a hidden prison once existed beneath a functioning commercial facility, there is now an empty lot awaiting redevelopment. The 2 warehouse managers accepted plea agreements. The owner faced trial and was convicted on all counts. Sentencing recommendations included life imprisonment without parole. Appeals are pending, but the evidence is conclusive. For the survivors, recovery continues. Some have returned to their home countries. Others have remained in protective programs while pursuing legal immigration status. Victim support organizations continue providing resources for trauma counseling, medical care, and long-term stability. The operation remains a case study in tactical response, intelligence gaps, and the reality that trafficking operations can exist in plain sight within legitimate commercial infrastructure. The warehouse had operated for 3 years. Thousands of shipments had moved through the facility. Employees had worked in the building without knowledge of what existed below the floor. The system was designed to be invisible. The confinement was engineered to avoid detection. The operation relied on the assumption that nobody would look beneath the surface of a functioning business. That assumption held until a K-9 unit signaled at the base of a storage cage, until operators noticed a floor inconsistency, until a steel panel was forced open and a ladder descended into darkness. The entry was routine until it wasn't. The discovery was hidden until it was found. And 43 people were locked underground until the moment they weren't.